It's a sign. Divine music.
Well, we have karaoke for chanting now. We have karaoke for Buddhist chanting now. It saves a lot on chanting books. And you can change the language without having to republish. It's got a lot of young people to go to the temple where it used to only be the old generation. So they've got karaoke now at the temple. You know, it's like ping pong church. You know. So in Chatong Lot Volume 9, eh? No, Lot Volume 9. So, for those of you who are new to the course, don't be put off by the fact that it's the 8th lesson of the course. I hope that every lesson will be self-contained, at least to some extent. But what we've been looking at so far on this course has been aspects of life that connect to quality of mind as you meet it when you try to meditate. And over the last few weeks, we've been looking at our ways of dealing with various challenges that face us when we try to work on ourselves through meditation. The 3 main challenges are things like having a vision of where you're going in the first place. And we said that to get to that vision, you need to know who you are first. You need to know where you're at before you can start to know where you're going. So those are some of the things we've been looking at over the past few weeks. After that, we looked at the ways in which we can integrate what we practice in our lives with what we practice in our meditation. So integrating sort of spiritual or self-transformation issues into everyday life in a way that you get some sort of commitment to it. Because even finding 20 minutes a day to meditate can be a challenge for some people. So finding that level of commitment and how that can be important to practice, something we talked about already. We've also seen how meditation and practice for self-transformation are not separate things, but in fact can be applied in everyday life as well. And we talked about, for example, how the things we say can affect our quality of mind. Whether if we're skillful in the things we say, it can reflect on us by giving us a better state of mind as a result. Less things to worry about, less things to regret later. And even the ways in which we can make decisions about important things in our life can be looked at in many different ways, and there may be different strategies for making decisions depending on the nature of the subject matter we're making decisions about. So for example, we might be interested in whether the decision we make affects only us personally, or whether it affects us and the people around us, who we may or may not be taking advantage of by our decisions. And we even talked about how decisions can affect society at large, where we might forego our own personal convenience for the sake of something which may bring convenience to society at large. And last time we looked at what's called the Eightfold Path, which very clearly shows that meditation isn't just a practice in isolation, but it's a link in a chain of as many as 8 different things which we do in our lives, which brings us into a cycle of self-development, and how we could use that Eightfold Path to distinguish between spiritual practices which might be compatible or incompatible with progress. So things like dabbling in black magic, we surmised was not helpful because it actually unwinds all the good stuff which you've done in developing your higher level of mindfulness, instead of helping you to go further with it. So it's not that all spiritual things or all forms of transformation might be transformation for the better. You have to be aware that some might be transformations for the worse as well. And as we elaborate further, we find that we haven't come to a complete end of decisions to make. There are also decisions on a cultural level which are sometimes hard to make. And this answers to a third challenge which we have as those involved with self-transformation, which is how we can still get along with people in society well enough that when we gain some benefit from working on ourselves, that people still look up to us enough to be interested to maybe try what we're doing for themselves as well. Because there is a risk when we start to work more on ourselves that we become so introverted that we don't speak the same language as the people around us anymore, and we isolate ourselves as a result, which is a pity, because if we've learned something from our practice, then presumably other people ought to be able to gain something from that as well. But if we isolate ourselves and make ourselves a complete freak, then no one will be interested to listen to what we have to say, even though we might have some very useful and beneficial things which we could advise them on. So, is there some degree to which we ought to try to fit in with other people in society, even though they might not be as interested in self-transformation as ourselves? Again, there's a point of balance for it. It said that when in Rome, do as do the Romans. That's a good rule of thumb for fitting in with people. But what if you go to Rome and all the Romans are plucking out their eyes? Would you also want to be blind just to fit in? Presumably there is a limit to how far you take your attempts to fit in with others. And on this front, there is some rules of thumb which you can use to see just how far you can go in fitting in with others. Because obviously you don't want to isolate yourself more than it's really necessary. Firstly, things which you might want to do which you'd fit in with other people as far as it doesn't compromise your own baseline of morality. So, you can go to a party and you can have a good time, but if you have to get drunk along with all the other people and you find that that doesn't really fit in with your idea of elevating your quality of mind, or you find that it's taking advantage of the weaknesses of yourself to do that, then perhaps you would just go for socializing and having a good time without the drunken bit. Last time, probably the time before actually, we looked at 5 basic virtues where we go beyond merely not doing things to take advantage of other people, but we go beyond that. For example, not killing or harming people, but showing compassion towards them instead. So we have a set of 5 things: compassion, generosity, contentment with one's spouse, artful speech, and developing mindfulness. Remember, we called this set of behaviours 5 virtues. If it doesn't go against those virtues, then again, it might be something which we want to fit in with others. So if a particular fitting in with other people doesn't mean that we compromise our compassion, for example, then why not go ahead and fit in with them? Doesn't break with local custom. if you go from place to place, different areas may have customs which don't go as far as to break the law, but it may create a conflict with people in the local place if you don't try and fit in with them. To give an example, if children go around at Halloween and they come knocking on your door and they expect to get sweets or whatever, and you say, whoa, this Halloween stuff is nonsense and black magic and whatever, and not having anything to do with it, you know, what will those poor children think about you when they get turned away from your door? You know, if it's something harmless enough, you know, why not let them, you know, why not play along with them? So if something is a local custom, then, you know, why not go along with it? But there are some local customs which perhaps you wouldn't want to do. For example, there's one weird town I heard about in Belgium where they not only drink wine, but they put live fish spawn in the wine before they drink it. You know, so not only do you get to dull your senses with the wine, but you also, you know, you can count up how many fish you've killed in an evening by drinking wine with fish in it. You know, so there may be some customs which, you know, you draw the line at. I'm sure there are plenty of other customs which you might want to turn your nose up, but you know, some are perfectly harmless, so why not go along with them? But you need to have a stance on such things. It's not that all things, just because they're culture, are, you know, to be encouraged. You know, some aspects of culture can be better forgotten. And the law, of course, we said that the law can be a fairly rough and ready indicator of what is right or wrong in a situation, but if you come into conflict with the law, then it can be, you know, can be something which would reflect badly on you. There are some things which, some funny laws as well, I must admit. For example, as a monk, normally I'm supposed to go on alms round to collect food, and there's no harm in that, apparently. You know, anyone who wants to give some food can, and if they don't want to give food, then, you know, it's not really disturbing them. But in some countries it's not allowed, it's seen as begging, and in some countries begging is not allowed. So, you know, in such countries I'd have to adapt my decorum to fit in with the laws of that country.
What about England? Do you do it here?
I've tried, but and I've never really sort of found that it was a useful use of my time.
What about approaching big companies like, you know, Sainsbury's?
I think there are better ways to approach them, but I have been accosted by old age pensioners who wanted to give something and were disappointed. I didn't have a bowl with me at the time. It's one instance where I was in, where was it? Not Macclesfield. Warrington. I was in Warrington, and there's a sound of electric motor following me around everywhere. And I turned around and there was a old age pensioner on an electric wheelchair, and she said, "Stop, stop, stop. Aren't you a monk? And don't monks need things at their temple?" And this was the day when they had a bus to pick up all the old age pensioners with mobility problems to bring them into the shopping centre to do their weekly shopping. And this old age pensioner had remembered that she'd once given things of use to a temple, and she wanted to do that again because it made her feel good. And she said, "Just stay there, don't go anywhere." So I sort of waited there, and I thought, is she going to come back or not? And she came back with 2 sackfuls of potatoes. And she said, "I wasn't going to buy you orange juice because fresh ones are much better." So she had 2 sackfuls of oranges, and she said, "And you can squeeze them for yourself, it'll be much fresher." So I thought, well, you know, I got 2 sackfuls of potatoes and 2 bags of fresh oranges. And so I couldn't go anywhere anyway after that.
And you were hundreds of miles from the temple.
Yeah, I was quite distant, had to be rescued. But the old lady was very satisfied that day. She'd done her bit. So that's England, and that's the generosity of England for you. So when it comes to compromising socially, there are some guidelines which you can use. And to turn a page in our course to move on to how you can apply yourself in situations that even simple things can become things which you can use as leverage to transform yourself in a more spiritual way. In fact, there are many mundane aspects of our lives which, if we take a new look at them in terms of how they can be used to further our spiritual development, in fact, we find that almost any area of life you can use to examine yourself and improve on yourself as well. Sometimes we think that spiritual practice is something we do when we're not doing other things. But in fact, if we have the right attitude to them, anything which we turn our hand to can be an opportunity to develop qualities in ourselves, especially qualities of not having excuses about things all the time. Normally, if a person is going to change, then they have to encounter some sort of resistance. And earlier in the course we talked about what we call demons, which tend to be the sort of things which crop up every time you try to do something positive in your life to improve. So for example, just at the moment when you're thinking to go and give a hand to an old lady crossing the road, there's a hailstorm or something like that. Or just when you're thinking to do an extra meditation, you sometimes suddenly feel very strong attraction for the pillow at the end of your bed. There always seems to be some trick which seems to come up to be played on you to make it harder to achieve the good things which you try to do in your life. And these things we call demons. If you're interested, you can look at some of the notes from earlier in the course. But in order to overcome those sort of things and to do good things, positive things in spite of those, you do need to have a sort of uncompromising nature to do good things no matter what it takes. To do things in spite of any ifs and buts which might crop up in your mind. And if you can do that sort of thing, it will develop a certain sort of nature in yourself which always demands something better, always demands you to make progress, to do better than you've done before, which can turn even a very boring subject into something which is quite a challenge to yourself. For example, if you were to look at study, and you wanted to study in a way which you was really of true benefit to yourself instead of being merely a chore, then you have to ask yourself if you've really taken your study to its full extent or not. To give an example of this, I think you have this in your notes, it's probably a bit clearer. Some people, when they study, they just try to get themselves a knowledgeable teacher and they think that's enough. If they get themselves a teacher, then the teacher will do the rest for them. If they do that, then they get rather limited results in their studies, because all they manage to do is they come within, it's not easy even to read it. They can learn by example, but they don't learn anything, they don't listen to anything which a teacher says, for example. If you want to go one step further than that, you have to start listening to what the teacher says. Some people will say, I go to see the Dalai Lama, but they don't do anything, I've got the Dalai Lama as my teacher. But they never listen to a word of what the Dalai Lama says because it's all much too inconvenient to put into practice in their lives, for example. But the person who can go one step further than that and actually listen to what the Dalai Lama has to say and perhaps sort of digest some of that, will certainly go a lot further in their studies. So they listen attentively, then they might remember it for a day or two, and then they're back to normal in their lives and be as unenlightened as they were before. Some people go a step further than that, and they actually commit what they've learned to memory, so that what they've learned can actually continue to give some benefits in their lives. And maybe, although they don't understand a particular thing they've learned in the beginning, maybe the penny will drop, but they're doing something else completely different, if it happens to be in the back of their mind. So they're taking those studies a little bit further from the fact they've made the effort to do the memorizing. It's not just for spiritual things, but even things like learning a new language, you have to go and memorize the verb tables. If you're learning arithmetic, you have to memorize the times tables. But if you have memorized them, then you can do so much more with that knowledge than you could if you have to find the book on it each time you want to use it. Not only memorizing things, but applying them. Sometimes you can know about something in theory, but it's not until you try putting it into practice that that really becomes knowledge in depth. Like the new guy you get who's just fresh out of university in your office can be a really unpopular person because all they've got is great theories and everything, but they've never actually put any of it into practice. Knowledge which has been applied somehow takes roots on a much deeper level. And this is especially the case in terms of knowledge which concerns self-transformation. If you can apply it for your own benefit, that's one thing. If you can apply it for the benefit of others, then that goes one step further. So if you think you've mastered a subject, try checking back to see whether you've taken the knowledge you have through all of these 7 steps, in fact, 7 veils of knowledge. And then you'll know for yourself whether you've really overcome all the ifs and buts you have concerning doing studies. Start to get my drift? Sometimes we think we've already done it all, we've already mastered something, but in fact, we only have a very superficial understanding of it. But if you can take it through to the full extent, then in fact the knowledge itself is not what you've learned about, but you start learning about yourself and your own habits in relation to that knowledge, which in fact is knowledge on a much deeper level. So even learning about something very mundane can be a learning experience in itself, where you learn about yourself in relation to that knowledge. Some people come and ask me what subject they should study at university. Should I be a doctor, or should I be a civil servant, and usually I tell them to choose anything which they enjoy, because it's the journey and not the destination which is the important thing about being in university. You come out of university a more mature person from the experience of having done the studying, not from what you can remember at the end of it. Because it's the process rather than the knowledge itself which changes people. They come out of university and they can be self-sufficient in knowledge. They know where to find knowledge in anything you care to think of. That's the thing you get out of being in university. So it's a sort of unconditionality. It's not settling for second best for knowledge. In the workplace you can use exactly the same sorts of principles. Sometimes you could say, well, I go to work and I'm just an employee and my boss doesn't deserve to have any high quality work coming out of his office anyway, because he never is a good example in the first place, and this isn't the sort of job I've been wanting to do all my life, so what's the point of giving it my best anyway? If I were to give it my best, I'm sure it would come out much better than this anyway. What's the point anyway? I don't get paid very much for it. But you can have a different approach to your work, where you think that anything which you've laid your hands on has to come out to the best of the possible ability. If it's your craftsmanship which you're demonstrating in the workplace, then let it be something which has the mark of a real craftsman on it. if it passes your hands, then it has to be really the best. And it doesn't matter whether your boss is going to be satisfied with it or notices a difference, but you know for yourself whether it's done to the best of your ability or not. And there's a satisfaction in that which runs much deeper than merely getting a salary at the end of the month. Even your workplace can be a place where you test out your own sense of quality, your own sense of challenging yourself to do things better than before. You could say, well, why not settle for second best? Work isn't where it's done. Get it out of the way as quick as I can, then I'll go back to do my real practice at home. But there is a danger in that. And the first danger is society has actually invested quite a lot in you. From the time you were born, your parents have lavished food, care, protection on you. When you've been at school, then you've had training and teaching lavished on you by your teachers for 12 years, 16 years. And if you don't use that to come out with a product from your own abilities at the end of the day, then you could say that you have been ungrateful for all of that which has been invested in you. If you come out with shoddy work, is that really living up to all the care and attention which has been lavished on you since you were a child? That's one way of looking at it, that you're an ungrateful person for not using your latent abilities to the full. But for Western people, that's sometimes not a very convincing argument.
The word human potential, you just say strength.
Yes, the strengths you have as a person may be on many different levels. The strength, the credibility, I think it should have been in colour really, shouldn't it? Connections.
Ability?
Sorry?
Ability?
Yes, I think that would probably fit the fonts on it, and knowledge. So the worth of yourself as a person, which has been developed through all these forms of inputs. Maybe one person is not the same as another, but everyone has something, But if they don't use that, then eventually, even if they don't lose it, they could say it's a waste of all the care and attention that's been lavished on them. It's not a particularly Western argument, but if you want to put it in another way, maybe in a more convincing way for Westerners, supposing you don't work to the fullest of your ability, so you lower your own standards because you don't think it's really worth trying your hardest. So you start to settle for your own convenience instead of really trying to push yourself to do your best in something. So when you don't push yourself anymore, when it does come to time to really to do things to the best of your ability, you start doing it reluctantly. You do things with only passable quality. You do things only well enough not to attract the complaints of other people, even though you know that it's not really good quality work you've done. Later you start to not take responsibility, even when the shoddiness of your work is starting to create problems for others. You don't take responsibility for it anymore, because you got used to the fact that, what can you expect anyway? And in the end, you lose the ability to distinguish what's quality work and what's shoddy work anymore, because you've not made the distinction. So you become a lower quality person as a result of the fact that you've not tried to do your best in a situation. So you sort of backslide, where before you could discern quality in things, you lose that ability, just from the fact that you've not tried to do things to the best of your ability. So there's a dangers attached to it. It's not, you can't be complacent and think just because you can recognize quality in something